Fellas, I had no idea that George Groves was that much bigger than Chris Eubank Jr. Um, damn. I've been going around very confidently saying that I believe Chris Eubank Jr. is going to defeat and dethrone George Groves, a guy that I do like as a fighter. I do have respect for. I like George Groves people. I've been following George Groves for many years, since like 2011 when he fought James DeGale. So I go way back with George Groves. I've been following George Groves longer than Chris Eubank Jr. That's for sure. But I kept saying, like, I feel that he has a lot of mileage in his tank, and I feel like Chris Eubank Jr. is more in his prime. But I'm seeing these press conferences, and George Groves looks really big compared to Chris Eubank Jr. Not just in terms of height, but just in terms of also his own physique. Like, he just looks like he's naturally a bigger man. Chris Eubank Jr. looked like a little man compared to George Groves. I thought they were like the same height. He just looks more like he has more body mass and more physical strength than George Groves. Than Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. looks very, he looks short and slim compared to someone like George Groves. Right? George Groves looks a lot taller and a lot more, he just looks like he has more body mass. But Chris Eubank Jr. is a guy that is obviously a natural middleweight. And he's also a very slim guy. If you look at Chris Eubank Jr., he's always been like one of those slim type of guys. Like, he's a very, he's not like a, big muscular guy like someone like Anthony Joshua. He's just a very skinny guy with like low body fat. While George Groves, he's never really had like, he's never been like shredded, but he's always had like more, I guess, like more meat on him and stuff. So yeah, this is probably an advantage for someone like George Groves because, when it comes to George Groves is used to fighting bigger guys. When he fought Carl Froch was much bigger than George Groves, right? Carl Froch was like 6'3", and he was a natural super middleweight, right? Carl Froch was a big super middleweight, 6'2", 6'3", and he was a big super middleweight, while George Groves is like 5'11". He also fought James DeGale, who's like a natural super middleweight. He's like 6'1". He also fought Badabu Jack, who's like 6'2", who now, by the way, fights at light heavyweight. So George Groves is a guy that is used to being in there with bigger men, right? He's used to being in there with guys like Carl Froch, Badabu Jack, James DeGale. These guys are bigger than Chris Eubank Jr. So now he's going to be in there against someone like Chris Eubank Jr., who's shorter than him, and a guy who moved up from middleweight. Again, maybe he's wearing some soles, something on his shoes that make him appear taller, but even without that, he just looks like he's a naturally bigger man and stronger man than Chris Eubank Jr. But again, Jamie Cox was a middleweight. If you remember, in the lead up to the fight, George Groves kept saying, well, Jamie Cox was a natural middleweight, but Jamie Cox was able to push George Groves back. He was able to push him back. And I think Chris Eubank Jr. is, because I see a lot of people saying, well, Chris Eubank Jr. is a natural middleweight. He's not as strong as George Groves. And that might be true. But Jamie Cox was able to push back George Groves. I know he lost with the body shot, but he was able to push back George Groves. I think Chris Eubank Jr. is a better talent than Jamie Cox. I think he has better engine. I think he has better uppercuts, better combinations on the inside. I think he's a better fighter on the inside. I think George Groves, even though I do think that this is going to be an advantage for George Groves, I do think he's probably going to be physically stronger than Chris Eubank Jr. And that is a good thing for George Groves. But I also think it might be a bad thing because maybe George Groves might think, oh, I'm physically taller and stronger than Chris Eubank Jr., so I'm going to impose my size on him. But I think if he tries to impose in size on on Chris Eubank Jr., I think it's going to actually work against him because Chris Eubank Jr. wants you to work on the inside against him. He wants you to give him that, he wants to fight you on the inside. So I think if George Groves goes into this fight thinking, okay, I'm just going to put my man, I'm going to manhandle him because I'm naturally the stronger guy, I think that's going to play against him. I think it's going to play against him because that's what Chris Eubank Jr. wants. He's going to allow Chris Eubank Jr. to throw those wicked uppercuts and stuff like that. One thing I will say, George Groves looks very confident. I did not sense no, fear, like, intimidation. I didn't sense none of that from George Groves. I think he's very confident. I think he believes that he could definitely beat Chris Eubank Jr. He shows there's no fear in George Groves. I do also think that Chris Eubank Jr. is very confident. But one thing I will say is I do think Chris Eubank Jr. is definitely, even though he was talking a lot, I get a sense that Chris Eubank Jr. knows that this is going to be a tough fight for him. I know he didn't admit this in the press conference. You know, he seemed like his self. He seemed very arrogant, very, cocky. But I think Chris Eubank Jr., like, with his body language, I think he knows that George Groves is going to be a tough fight for him. Because he looked like he was showing some respect to George Groves. Normally, he acts like this guy's nothing. But when they were sitting there, when they were going at each other, he seemed a little bit like he was backing off a little bit. So I think that I think he knows that George Groves is going to be a tough fight. I never said that Chris Eubank Jr. would just easily beat George Groves. I just said I believe he's going to beat him. Yeah, this is a very interesting fight, guys. Like, a very interesting fight. A fight that I am very well looking forward to. Chris Eubank Jr. said something interesting in the press conference. He said, George Groves is a guy that every time he fights at world level, he crumbles. You know, he fought Carl Froch twice at world level. He crumbles. He fought Bada Bujak. He crumbles. So he's basically implying that George Groves is a good fighter, but he's a good fighter when it comes to, like, the guys who are not elite at super middleweight, like, Martin Murray, Shuvanov, all this stuff. But when he fights the elites like, Carl Froch, Bada Bujak, he comes up short. And I could see where he's going with that. That is... But George Groves said something interesting that I agree with. George Groves said, yeah, he might come up short, but he never quits. And he's totally right. I've never seen George Groves quit. I've never seen George Groves quit. When he fought... when he lost to Carl Froch the first time, he lost to him, but he was fighting, and that was a horrible stoppage by the ref, but he was there. He never gave up. In the second, he also said this, in the second fight, he got knocked out, but he got knocked out. He didn't know what happened. He never gave up in that fight, in that shoe. In the Bada Bujak fight, he never gave up in that fight. He was fighting the whole time. So that's one thing I will say. George Groves is very tough. I've never seen him quit. I've never seen him, like I said, if you're going to beat him, you have to really... You're going to be in a tough fight with George Groves because he's very determined. That's what I like about George Groves' attitude as a fighter. He's a determined type of fighter. Very determined, very tough. So I don't think, so yeah, I don't agree with that with Chris Eubank Jr. saying that, George Groves is going to crumble, because he kept saying George Groves is going to crumble once he fights me because he's going to realize he's not as good as me. I've never seen George Groves crumble. George Groves said something funny. He said that he thinks Fedor Shuvanov is more tough. He's probably more tough than someone like Chris Eubank Jr. Who knows? We don't know. We haven't really seen, and because George Groves also said something fascinating. He said we don't know Chris Eubank Jr. We haven't really seen him in there, show heart. And I agree with him. I've been saying this for months. I like Chris Eubank Jr. I like Chris Eubank Jr. as a fighter. I think he's a talent, but I don't know too much about him. I don't know how good he is as a fighter. Like I said, I've never been impressed with his resume. He looks good, but the best guy he's fought was Billy Joe Sanders, and he lost. And that's another thing I will agree with George Groves. George Groves lost to the top guys, but he fought top guys. Chris Eubank Jr. hasn't. This is the best opponent Chris Eubank Jr. has fought, besides Billy Joe Sanders. So we're gonna find out a lot against in this fight for Chris Eubank Jr. Because what happens if it gets tough? What happens if he can't knock out George Groves? And George Groves, being the tough guy that he is in his face, is he gonna capitulate? We don't know. We don't know how. Because like I said, George Groves has a point. Chris Eubank Jr. has never been in that situation where he's under pressure and the guy is not giving up, and the guy is actually a top guy. So this is why I think it's a great fight for Chris Eubank Jr. And this is a good fight for George Groves. And I'm still leaning towards Chris Eubank Jr. I think he's going to do it. But I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest, guys, if George Groves wins. That's all I have to say, guys. Let me know what you guys think of this video, and I'm out.